Hi, good day, and welcome to the Caribbean Parenting Public Education Series, where we have conversations that highlight fundamental yet often unspoken aspects of family support. Today's series gives voice to matters surrounding World Children's Day as it is observed on November 20th of each year. World Children's Day was first established in 1954 as Universal Children's Day and is celebrated on the 20th of November each year to promote international togetherness, awareness among children worldwide, and improving children's welfare. November 20th is an important date as it is the date in 1959 when the UN General Assembly adopted the Declaration of the Rights of the Child. It is also the date in 1989 when the UN General Assembly adopted the Convention of the Rights of the Child. Joining us to discuss a child's right to protection is Dion Gashad. Now, Dion joined the NGO Families in Action in September 2002 as a temporary receptionist and became the organization's chief executive officer in 2016. Dion is a trained workshop facilitator and regularly conducts development and coaching workshops with various populations ranging from children to adults. She has served as a panelist on a number of national and international conferences, including the Caribbean HIV/AIDS Conference, the UE Youth at Risk Conference, and the Rape Crisis Child Abuse Conference. Dion, Thank you so much for taking time to join in with us for today's discussion about protecting the rights of the child. Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Good morning and thank you for having me. And I must start by saying Happy World Children's Day to all of our youngsters out there. Happy
Indeed.
Children's
Indeed. And so, even as we get started with this conversation, Dion, I want to ask you, when we start a conversation about the right of a child to protection, how should we define protection as it relates to children?
Good question. So, when we talk about protection of children, we really talk about preventing, ensuring that they do not come to harm. And when we talk about not coming to harm, we're not just talking about physical harm. We're talking about ensuring the child's holistic well being. So, preventing emotional harm, ensuring that they are not neglected, that their well being is just on 100%. And also, when we start talking about any kind of protection of children, we must talk about the Convention of the Rights of the Child, because most of us really think about protection from a physical sense. So we only think about, protecting a child from being the victim of hits and cuffs and sexual exploitation. But the Convention of the Rights of the Child, which has been ratified by most countries around the world, is really an instrument that speaks to the protection of children. And within that convention, there are actually about 7 articles that speak to the protection of children, right? So in addition to physical abuse, to sexual abuse, to neglect, the convention also talks about protection from kidnapping, protection of their privacy, which many of us don't think about, protection from harmful drugs, things like that, right? So we have to look at the child's protection from a holistic level and not just focus on the child's physical, which is very important. The child's physical well being is very important, but other aspects of protection are equally important.
Now, Diane, when it comes to the rights of a child, typically this is not a conversation that comes up in everyday dialogue among parents. So,
Correct.
what do you believe parents should understand about why they should be intentional about holding on and including in their family culture the idea of the right of the child? Why is this holistic being of the child so important as parents needing to be intentional to say, I must protect this holistic being? What is it
So
that we want parents to understand?
So first and foremost, parents need to understand a child is a rights holder. And especially in the Caribbean, where we have different views of children, we often don't understand that just like adults, a child is a rights holder. So we have a responsibility to ensure that they are afforded their rights. That's the first thing. But the second thing is it's children's vulnerability. They are vulnerable because of their dependence on the adults and caregivers to ensure their well-being, right? When we think about a baby is dependent on adults to ensure every aspect of their well-being. If an adult doesn't or an older person doesn't feed that child, the child starves, right? So that vulnerability comes from childhood, from babyhood, straight into the period of time when the child starts to, when the adult rather starts to work. So the fact that they are dependent on adults for their well-being means that they are more vulnerable than many populations. And even within that catchment group that we call children, there are children with increased vulnerabilities. So there are children who are more vulnerable than others, children with disabilities, children living in institutional homes, children in situations of extreme poverty. All of those children bear even more a greater need of protection because of those vulnerabilities.
Yeah. How can parents teach children about their right to be protected, because
Right.
we're saying that children are rights holders. We're phrasing it that way, yes. But we must recognize that children don't spend all of their time with their parents, who we want to hope would be enforcers of this right. So let's look at those instances where children would be away from the purview of their parents. How do parents teach children about this right so they could communicate and exercise and advocate for their own rights in terms of being protected?
Right. So before parents even start to teach about children's rights, they need to know about children's rights. So it's important. The Convention on the Rights of the Child is a really important document. And for many people, it may come across as an unwieldy document. And that's why across the years, many institutions have created child-friendly versions of the convention. So a parent can even access that child-friendly version and become familiar with it. And across the space of time, they teach those rights to their child. And as the child gets older and they can read for themselves and that kind of thing, ensure that a child has a copy of the CRC as well. But there are other ways that parents can teach. They say the best way we can teach is to model. So a child expects to be treated the way they are treated at home. So we must protect their rights at home. We protect their rights by knowing their rights, so that that child knows that I am not physically hurt. I am not verbally abused at home. My right to voice my opinion in a respectful manner is enforced at home, so that when I leave my comfort zone of my home, I am expecting that these rights are also respected outside of my home. And I will call out anyone who does not respect those rights.
Yes, and even as we continue with our conversation, we want to remind the audience viewing live that we are indeed live, so you can feel free to ask questions on anything pertaining to the right of a child to protection, so that Dion would be able to share some insight. But Dion, even as we talk about insight, I'm sure we can all agree that sometimes Caribbean culture deviates a little bit from what we would want to describe as parents protecting, because sometimes we can be so steeped in culture and the right of the parent to be right and to be the dominating force that this, in truth, can sometimes infringe on children's rights to be protected in their whole being. So, my question to you is, for parents who are looking on, can you possibly maybe identify traits that are sometimes common in households that actually infringes on a child's right to protection? So thereafter you would be able to share, instead of this, parents can consider that, so that indeed the rights of the child can be protected.
Sure. So, traditionally, in our Caribbean households, we lean toward an authoritarian style of parenting. So there's a very fixed power dynamic in the household. I am the parent, and you are the child, and what I say goes. Because when we look way back into our history, that is what we have been accustomed to as a society, right? When we look at colonialism and slavery and indentured labor and that kind of thing, it has trickled down into the households, that authoritarianism. And what that means is that the child is seen almost as a possession, right? An adult in waiting. So the child is not seen as an individual for themselves. And if we view children as individuals for themselves, then we understand that they are rights holders. But when we don't, we believe that because of that power dynamic that we establish in our households, and those power dynamics, they come in handy, right? Because we have all those conversations about don't be a child's friend, be their parent, and that kind of thing. But sometimes in Caribbean households, we take it too far, right? So we believe that we can speak to our children in any manner. We see all those videos going around, those hilarious videos about how Caribbean parents speak to children, right?
Yes.
And we laugh about it. But really and truly, what parents are doing in many instances, they are disrespecting that child's right to be respected as an individual, right? So we need to ensure that we remember to respect our children just as we would respect anyone else, right? And so we need to move away from that heavy dependence on that authoritarianism to being more authoritative, right? So for those of you who do all your leadership courses and that kind of thing, you know that an authoritative leader is not so fixed on having that power dynamic established and having all the players reminded of who is the powerhouse, right? And it's based more on respect and an understanding that we can operate almost as equals in our households, but knowing that I am the protector here. I am the person who will take care of your needs here, right? And just as I respect you as a child, you have to respect me as your parent. And what is that when we go back to authoritarianism? It also gives many parents that leeway to believe that, you know, anything that the child does, I raise my hand and hit you a lash, or I pinch you, or I cuff you down, right? Because you did not listen to the head honcho in this house.
Yes, I definitely understand. Dion, I want to ask you, what then, as we talk about the opposite of and giving respect, what are some basic examples you can give of things parents can be intentional about doing that would help build this level of respect and openness where the child can be developed holistically, and in turn, it means that they would be protected in their person? Do you have any, maybe 2 or 3 points that you can share with parents?
Yes, so I'll start by referencing back to a question you asked earlier. Be sure that you know about your children's rights and teach them about their rights, right? The CRC is an excellent document that can be used. So that's one, know about rights, because when we know about rights, we respect rights. But the second thing, which I find is key in any relationship, and especially in the parent child relationship, is fostering that healthy communication,
Mm.
right? And listen carefully to what I say, healthy communication. So going back to that adherence to you're not your child's friend, this isn't communication where you're gossiping with your child, you know, about the neighbors and that kind of thing. This is ensuring that your child knows that I am here to listen to you, and I will speak with you respectfully, and in turn I expect that respectful communication from you. And what it does, it really opens children up to being more comfortable to come and speak to their parents about any issue, right? And what that healthy communication does as well is that it kind of stops us from jumping to conclusions when we believe that a child has transgressed. So before we jump to the conclusions and start to go wild on the child, for want of a better term, we start to ask questions and we probe and we try to understand, you know, what really stimulated this particular behavior. And we would find that we come up with better ways to discipline our children as well that do not infringe on their right to protection from physical harm, because we are now listening to them.
Yes, and I want to ask you as well, Dion, when we think about teenagers who,
Mhm.
as they go to school or they come across information online, and they're probably learning about the rights of the child, because as a teen, you still fall under that umbrella of child to be protected. If a teen does not live in a home where their rights are being protected in this way, do you have any advice for teenagers on how they could promote this sort of healthy communication to help their parents better understand? Any advice to teenagers who want to pursue embracing their rights?
So, you know what I love about this particular generation of teens? They are very open to approaching an adult and saying, hey, when you do this, I don't like so, and I feel like so, and, you know, can we work on doing XYZ instead? So if a teenager lives in a household like that, where they can comfortably approach their parent or caregiver and explain to them, when you cuss me out, I feel so hurt, and can we not communicate in that kind of manner? Then go right ahead. Now, if a teenager lives in a household where that protection, that exposure to harm is really it's really out there, then what we need to think about is talking about reporting.
Right.
So, reporting if you're in school, reporting to a teacher, teachers have the responsibility, teachers and principals have the responsibility to ensure that this is reported to the due authorities to ensure that the child under their care as well is protected from that kind of harm.
Yes. And, finally, I want to be able to ask you, Dion, can you share with the audience what avenues are available, governmental or otherwise, that would help with the protection of children so that way parents can know from where they can source support?
Yes. So let's look at the most extreme situations first. So, for instance, you are aware of a child whose protection rights are being severely infringed. That child is being abused sexually, physically, being neglected, whatever it is. Then, within most Caribbean countries, there is some children's authority type institution that is the first port of call for the protection of children. So in Trinidad and Tobago, of course, we have the Children's Authority, and they have a hotline that persons can use to call to make reports, and you can remain anonymous as well. So that's in the most extreme cases. But there are parents who recognize that, I need a little help, and we always say at our organization that parenting doesn't come with a handbook, right?
That's right.
So you especially with your first child, you're just kind of playing it by ear, and you're getting the advice from the older, more experienced people. So there are so many resources that parents can access. So within the state, there's the Office of the Prime Minister, Children, Child and Gender and Child Development. They tend to run a lot of programs. National Family Services run parenting programs, usually between June and August. And it really is just keeping in touch with social media, looking in the newspapers, and you see when those programs come up. The Ministry of Community Development, under their mediation unit, they have parenting support groups that really help parents to understand, how to parent in a rights-driven fashion. And then there are the NGOs, so there's Families in Action.
Yes.
We run a lot of parenting education programs throughout the year. There are NGOs like Parenting TT who also do the same. And there is the Caribbean Parenting via
Yes.
this digital show, listening. And don't just listen listen to apply. And
That's
understand
right.
that none of us are perfect parents. We are all learning along the way.
Yes, definitely. So, Diana, I appreciate you so much for coming on this morning to share, even as we give observance to World Children's Day. And even as we close this segment, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with the viewing audience?
I think I just want to emphasize what I just said. None of us are perfect parents. However, we can perfectly try our best. And perfectly trying your best ensures that the child is raised in a manner that ensures their protection.
Right. But Dion, I know we're closing, but I'm just looking on and I realize we have one question. So we're just going to take 2 minutes to answer that question. And what the question says, I'll read it for you, but I can also make sure we have it on screen so that we can view. But the question says, the Bible says, spare the rod and spoil the child. As a parent in this era, is corporal punishment advisable?
So, a big hearty no to corporal punishment. In fact, the Convention on the Rights of the Child speaks to corporal punishment. And it's so interesting because so many countries have ratified And yet, when you look at our legislation, we are still not fully eliminating corporal punishment. So, for instance, in Trinidad and Tobago, we've eliminated it from the schools, but we haven't put anything in place to ensure that parents don't use corporal punishment. Many people say that, I get licks as a child and look at me now. We are not parenting for 1950, and we're not parenting even for 1990, or right now we're not even parenting for 2019. We're parenting in an era that is very different, an era that it requires us to communicate with our children. Once we lay that foundation with our children, we would find that the rod isn't even necessary at most times, right? But it is harmful to children's well-being to depend on the rod, right? And I just want to be facetious and ask that spare the rod and spoil the child, is it in the Old Testament or the New Testament? Because if it's in the Old Testament, we know that many tenets of the Old Testament had been disregarded as we moved into the era of the New Testament. So now we're in a totally new era. We do not need corporal punishment, believe it or not. Discipline is more important. There are many ways that we can discipline children without hitting them.
That's right. And thank you so much for that question. Just slipped in there at the end, but I did not want to miss it. So thank you so much to all those who came in. Thank you, Dion, for joining us this morning for this episode of our parenting education series. And as I always say, mummies, daddies, aunties, and uncles, we trust that the information that was shared today was helpful and that you would be able to take the information that Dion from Families in Action has shared with us so that we can do parenting better. So we thank you for being with us. We thank you for viewing, and we trust that you would have a great rest of day. Take care.